Hello everyone, this is André Hedlund from Brazil, and I'm recording this interview for John Koenigs because he asked me to talk about a couple of questions. So I will do my best to give very straight answers, and I hope they help, okay? First of all, as I said, I'm from Brazil. I've been a teacher for about 15 years. I've worked at many different institutions, including a binational center, which means it is recognized by the American government, by the State Department of the United States. I've also worked for a British center that is recognized by the, I'm not sure what it is called in the UK, but it's the equivalent of the State Department in the UK. And I didn't really go to modern languages or pedagogy or anything like that in college. I actually studied international relations. That's my BA. And only now I got a master's degree in psychology of education. And I've taught all kinds of students, including very young learners, teens, adult learners as well, and senior people, the elderly too. So the question here that he starts with is, what attributes do you see in most successful students? I think resilience is very important. I feel like students who don't give up, who realize how effort plays a very important role in their learning, and realize that they can always learn, they will try to do whatever they can and find other strategies to try to learn. So I would say resilience, even though it might be very difficult, you have to keep going. And the second question is, how long does it take until you see a notable improvement in your students? I think that's a very relative, actually. I can see a lot of improvement in a couple of days for people who are real beginners. So, some people have never studied English before, and after the very first week, they can put a couple of sentences together. So there's a lot of improvement there. I think improvement happens pretty quickly at the beginning. You can see a difference. Then towards the end, when you get to a more advanced level, you don't really see that much difference, right? It's just, a couple of words here, or more complex grammar structures. But let's say if you're asking, how long does it take for you to be able to sort of manage or deal with most situations in English in some country, for example? I think you'd have to be at least an A2 plus student, or B1. So that takes around 300 hours maybe. So it depends. It could be almost 2 years, could be a year and a half, just 1 year. It depends on how many hours you're studying a week, right? And then the next one is, suggest one activity a student can do at home to improve their speaking. That's a great question. I feel like the best way for you to improve your speaking is by speaking. And if you can maybe set up a group on WhatsApp or another app and talk to people, that would be the best. Maybe you can even have a speaking club with some people in your local community, and you can go out. You can, I don't know, maybe have a happy hour or something like that. But if you cannot do any of those things, I think you can definitely try to talk to yourself. A lot of people say think in English. We think in many languages, It's not just, we cannot switch something in the brain and think only in English. But we can use it to describe what's going on in our lives. So we can use it to say, oh, tomorrow I'm going to do this, or maybe I did this yesterday. So you can definitely speak more, even if it's only with yourself. And suggest one activity a student can do to improve their vocabulary. Something I always encourage my students to do is called a lexical book. So they can get a notebook and they can maybe categorize the notebook in alphabetical order, and then every time they hear or maybe they see a word they've never seen before, they are supposed to write down and try to find definitions and examples. I actually ask them not to write the definitions there, or if they do, to cover the definitions with a post-it, so that every time they go back to the lexical book, they can do something called active retrieval, which is, trying to recover that neuronal network. And so this effort actually improves memory. So I'd say carry a book with you and write down everything that you learn, everything that is new. You can get that from TV series or magazines or music. Anything could be a source of vocabulary. Give one piece of advice for adult learners. I actually talked about adult learners today. I did a live on Instagram, so maybe, I'm not sure it's going to be available for a long time. But anyway, I think adult learners are much better at organizing themselves and finding intrinsic motivation. So they can actually apply techniques or strategies to learning that kids can't, or they don't really know about. So I think, and one thing that adult learners have to change many times is not so much their skills, but it's more like their mindsets. They feel like they won't be able to learn because they're too old, they started too late, and things like that. So my advice is, remember that you are excellent at organizing your time and finding the best strategy that works for you, and that you can always learn. It doesn't matter how old you are. And okay, a couple more questions. Is grammar an important part of your class? Definitely. Even though we don't really, sometimes we don't really talk about grammar, like this is grammar and this grammar structure is called this or that. But grammar is an essential part of every lesson. It's how we create, it's basically the formula of how to construct sentences in the language. So you need to know it, but you don't really have to focus on it. You can learn through noticing the grammar in models and examples that you have from the context that your book or your teacher gives you. So you can learn grammar from videos, from texts, and you don't realize you're actually working with grammar, but it's definitely very important. Now some technical questions, okay? So please describe your teaching or language development method. Well, I've been working a lot with the communicative approach for probably 10 years, since I started working in São Paulo, where I used to live. So I'm not sure you're familiar with Chomsky and Krashen and all those guys, but we try to use L1 as little as possible, so no Portuguese allowed in the class. And we do follow the PPP framework: presentation, practice, and grammar. Presentation, practice, and production. So we have a lead in, we have a more controlled practice, then less controlled practice, then freer practice, production in a context, and things like that. But I've actually quite recently started using more active methods. So PBL became a huge part of my lessons. So that's project-based learning, if you don't know, if you're not familiar with the acronym. And I've also sought inspiration in methods such as the Montessorian method and Waldorfian methods and things like that, to be more student-centered and actually allow students to be the bosses of their own learning in a way, and allowing them to discover things rather than just absorb things from me as the main source of information. So yeah, basically that. And do you have any major influences in regard to your teaching style? Nowadays, I would say a big influence is one of the most well-regarded educators in the world, born here in Brazil, in the Northeast. His name is Paulo Freire. You may have heard of him. And one thing he used to say is that kids are not like tabula rasa, you know, they're not empty boxes that we have to fill with, you know, small deposits of information from time to time. They're actually living things and who can help us co-construct their knowledge. So they are agents of their learning. And I feel like that's the way I teach nowadays, because I'm not really into the very traditional teacher-centered way of just, you know, sharing knowledge, speaking all the time in the class, and allowing students to, you know, learn or not. So Paulo Freire is definitely a major influence. And suggest some resources to help teachers continue to improve and develop. I'd say one of the things teachers should definitely do is become a member of their local TESOL association. So maybe here in Brazil we have Brass TESOL, and they're always promoting different events everywhere, local and national, international. And you can also become a member of IATEFL. That's the International Association for Teachers of English as a Foreign Language. And there's an international conference, the biggest one in the world, every year in the UK. You can do a bunch of online courses, a lot of them for free, if you use FutureLearn, edX, Coursera, for example. And you can also read related texts and blogs. I have a blog that I try to share ideas on how to do your professional development, how to implement neuroscience-based strategies in your lesson and things like that. So you should probably follow people who do that. And you could even set up a club with local teachers to discuss pedagogical practices and things like that. But I'd say, yeah, blogs and conventions and books, right? And a lot of YouTube videos. And how long did it take for you to feel comfortable in front of a class? I'm not sure about this one. I remember that my very first lesson was the first week of August of 2005, and I had only 3 students in the class. And even though it was only 3 students, they were all teenagers, I was extremely nervous. And I was probably speaking too fast and not really paying attention to what they were saying. And I'd say, you know, the very first semester I got pretty comfortable, I guess. But nowadays I'm very comfortable teaching any class. It doesn't really matter. I actually like the challenge, but it might take a while. It might take some time, really. And then you have what can you do to improve your teaching method? Like I said, join a TESOL group, a local TESOL group in your city. I'd say take a few courses, maybe some specialization courses like I did. Psychology of education. You can do something similar. You can actually do the CELTA. If you're not familiar with Cambridge CELTA, Delta, or Trinity, TESOL, anything. And do you have any professional goals for 2020? Yes, I have a couple. I'd say not just some, I have a lot of them. And I think the main one now is to work with some schools here in Brazil and find out what they are doing and how I can help using my recently acquired neuroscientific knowledge to help them maybe implement a couple of strategies that work better. So I'd say that's the one. And maybe just get the word out about neuroscience and go to a lot of conferences and discuss as much as I can. Okay, so last question. What improvements would you like to see in the English education field? Oh, that's a big one. Well, speaking from my context here in Brazil, I feel like there are two major problems. The first one is access, lack of access, especially for public school kids. So, according to Education First, I think only 5% of the Brazilian population speaks English at some level, which is very bad, right? And that's basically due to lack of access. So a lot of public school kids, they cannot learn English. They don't really have, they do have like one lesson a week if they're lucky, and the teacher teaches in a very traditional teacher-centered way. And to be very fair, many times the teacher doesn't even speak English. So I'd say increase access, but with quality. So we have to work with teachers' qualifications, right? And that will probably come from a shift, I guess, in our society, because a lot of people don't really respect teachers. You know, teaching is the last profession people would choose, and I think we have to change that. But also, I'd say the teachers who are out there in the market, they also have to do a lot of CPD, continuous professional development. And I feel like due to a lot of different factors, they are not, receiving very competitive salaries, and they're always overloaded. They have too many things to do, so they don't do it systematically. So I feel like if we can tackle those two fronts, maybe we can make a lot of improvements in the English education field. So we need people to start respecting teachers so that they can earn more, they can actually afford their professional development, and schools, they have to help with that as well. And we have to improve and, I would say, expand access in public schools, and then maybe we can make a huge difference. Okay, anyway, thank you very much. I hope this was useful. Very nice questions. And if you want to talk to me, if you want to send me an email, please go to my website. It's EDC Rocks, so EDCROCKS.com. You can read a lot of stuff about neuroscience and psychology there. And you can also follow EDC Rocks on Instagram. I normally post interesting things about education, and I also do some lives with, by myself and with a colleague on linguistics and neuroscience. Okay, thank you very much, John, and I hope this is good enough. Okay, bye bye. See ya.